So, today we're going to talk about a single piece of paper. Just a certificate. But this certificate has basically tied the Malaysian Chinese community in knots for, get this, half a century. It's called the UEC, and believe me, thanks to a recent political tremor, it is right back in the headlines. And that really brings us to the big puzzle we're trying to solve here. You've got this decades-long problem, a total deadlock, and one part of the country just solves it. Meanwhile, the other part is still completely stuck. How on earth is that possible? Well, let's unpack this thing. All right, here's how we're going to break it down. We'll start with that surprise news from East Malaysia and then get into what the UEC actually is. We'll look at the two totally different policies, the history of broken promises that led to so much distrust, this brand new 6-month deadline that has everyone holding their breath, and finally, what this whole mess really says about Malaysia itself.
Okay, first up, the one event that completely changed this entire conversation.
So, just a month before their state election, the government of Sabah over in East Malaysia did something the federal government hasn't had the guts to do for decades. They officially recognized the Unified Examination Certificate, the UEC. And this wasn't just some political speech, This was a formal, black and white written decree, a huge deal. So what does this recognition actually mean for people on the ground? It means that, for the very first time, someone in Sabah with a UEC certificate has a clear shot at a state-funded education and even a career in the public service. See, the state government didn't just recognize a piece of paper. They literally opened doors that have been slammed shut for 50 years. And they did it by calling it an issue for Sabah's children, which totally sidestepped the toxic racial politics that has paralyzed West Malaysia. Pretty clever, right? But, to really get why this is such a massive development, we need to back up for a second and just ask, what exactly is the UEC anyway? Okay, so the UEC, or Tong Khao, is the big standardized exam for students who go to Malaysia's independent Chinese secondary schools. And it's managed by this group called Dong Jiaozong, who are seen as these powerful guardians of Chinese education in the country. And, well, that adds a whole other layer of political weight to this entire thing.
So where did it come from? Well, you have to go back 50 years. Back in the early 70s, a new national education policy was trying to create a single system of schooling for everyone. A lot of the Chinese medium schools resisted this change, and so they became these privately funded independent high schools. The problem was they needed a credible qualification for their students. So, in 1975, the very first UEC exam was held. It was basically an act of survival.
And here's the crazy irony of it all. The USC is academically tough. I mean, really tough. Its science and math curriculum is seen as way harder than the national SPM exam, and it's much closer to pre-university levels like STPM or even A-levels. The exams are often bilingual, which is a massive plus when these students apply to top universities in the US, the UK, Europe, you name it. And yet, it's not recognized for entry into Malaysia's own public universities. Wild, right? This quote just perfectly nails the feeling of frustration. For half a century, you have this high-quality academic certificate, with graduates that countries like Singapore are dying to get their hands on, and in its own home country, it's treated like, well, an illegitimate child. And that brings us right to the heart of the conflict, these two completely different ways of looking at the UEC in West and East Malaysia. Over in West Malaysia, the whole thing is framed as a zero-sum game. On one side, you have some Malay nationalist groups who see the UEC as a threat to national unity and the Malay language. On the other side, you've got the Chinese community saying, hey, we're major taxpayers. This is our fundamental right. Barring our kids from public universities is discrimination. But then you hop over the South China Sea to East Malaysia, and the whole logic just flips. It's not a fight. It's a pragmatic strategy. They see UEC holders as a talent asset, and recognizing the certificate is just them exercising their state autonomy. This famous line from the late Chief Minister of Sarawak, a state that's recognized the UEC for a long time, just says it all. For them, it's not about ethnic politics. It's about a brain drain. They see the federal government pushing away brilliant young minds, and they're just not going to make the same mistake. So why is there so much anger and bitterness around this issue right now? To get that, we have to look at a very recent and very painful history of broken promises. The flashpoint was really the 2018 election. The Pakatan Harapan coalition won, and they were carried to victory by a massive 95% of the Chinese vote. And a key promise they made was to recognize the UEC. So they formed a special committee, the committee did its work, met with everybody, wrote a big report, and then Crickets. The government collapsed in 2020, and that report was never even shown to the cabinet. It just vanished, becoming what feels like a state secret. This left a huge psychological scar, and it pretty much cemented the feeling that you just can't trust political promises on the UEC. Which brings us right up to today, and a dramatic new twist that has really put the government's credibility on the line. So after all the backlash from what happened in Sabah, a senior minister, Anthony Loke, dropped a political bombshell. He publicly set a 6-month deadline to finally resolve the UEC issue. He even hinted that his party might have to rethink its place in the government if a solution isn't found. I mean, that is a huge political gamble. But the solution, if it comes, is not going to be simple. The Prime Minister, Anwar Ibrahim, is basically performing this incredible political tightrope walk. He can't just come out and say UEC is recognized, because that would infuriate his Malay nationalist allies. So the strategy is to package the solution inside a bigger, new language policy. The idea is to say, hey, we're strengthening the national language while also making space for others. It's a really technical, roundabout way to open the door just enough for the UEC holders without causing a massive political explosion. So finally, where could this all be headed? And what does this 50-year-long fight really tell us about the country? Well, there are basically 3 scenarios on the table for the next 6 months. The most likely is what you could call a grand compromise. The UEC gets recognized, but with strict conditions, like you have to have a credit in the National Malay Language exam. It's the kind of solution that nobody loves, but everybody can live with. The second possibility? The government just stalls again. If that happens, you'll probably see West Malaysian Chinese voters just give up entirely, while East Malaysia goes its own way, becoming this sort of education special zone, making the national divide even wider. And the least likely but most dangerous scenario? The whole ruling alliance collapses, triggering total political chaos. You see, when you get right down to it, the UEC isn't just about education anymore. It's become a mirror. It reflects all the deep cracks in Malaysia's political system, and it's a test of whether the country is mature enough to handle these complex, multi-ethnic challenges. And East Malaysia has kind of shown a way forward, haven't they? They've proved that when your politics isn't held hostage by a single ethnic story, common sense and pragmatism can actually win. It shows the problem isn't impossible to solve. The political framework is the real obstacle. Which leaves us with one last question to think about. If a government, after 50 years, can't even solve the problem of a single academic certificate, how can anyone trust it to handle the way more complex economic and social challenges that are coming? What we're really watching in these next 6 months isn't just about a certificate. It's a test. Can the nation find a compromise for this 50-year-old fight and maybe, just maybe, create a model for its own future? The answer is going to reveal a lot more than just the fate of a piece of paper.